Well, good morning and welcome again to the last week of our series called Reboot. It is also the last Sunday for the final week of summer break. Anybody excited school's about to start back? That's everyone who has kids is the one clapping right now. I know some people are nervous, but they're ready to jump back into their regular rhythm and routine. I know I am, and so we're ready to go. We're excited about that. Before we jump into this last week, though, just want to give you a quick update on what's going to happen next Sunday. Our Bridge Kids Worship Experience is going to reopen. Who's excited about that? Again, everybody with kids, we're pumped. And so if you're new to Bridgepoint, our Bridge Kids area, that's where our kids who are newborns through 5th grade, they have their own Sunday morning worship experience tailored to them. And so starting next week, that's going to be offered during our 10:45 service. So at this point, it's only during our 10:45 service. We're looking to add other service times in the near future. Also next week, you're not going to have to register to come and attend worship here, but we will have pre-registration available if you have kids. You're not required to do it, but there will be an express lane at the kids check-in, and so if you kind of want to get your kids in and ready to go quickly, you can do that. That'll be up tomorrow on our website at bpc.life. But today I'm excited. We're going to kind of wrap up this series we've been in called Reboot. And this week I was reading the story about a guy named Jose Alvarenga. And he's a fisherman down in Mexico, and he's fairly experienced. In fact, he'd been fishing in the deep sea waters off the coast of Mexico for over 30 years. He had a 17-foot skiff boat, and so he had loaded up one morning in November of 2012. He was going to go out and try to catch some shark and some marlin, and he was going to spend a decent amount of time out at sea. And as he kind of gets out in the deep water, he notices that a storm is coming in. And the storm was particularly bad, and it lasted for several days. And in an effort to save his own life, he ended up losing the engine on the boat. Not only that, his communications were knocked out as well. And so by the time the storm subsided, he found himself just floating out in the Pacific. And he began to drift and drift and drift. And he did that for the next 438 days. Until his boat landed ashore in the Marshall Islands, all the way across the Pacific. It's the longest time anyone has ever survived adrift in a boat that small, and he didn't even know where he was. He just saw land. He jumped out of his boat. He swam for the shore. He had no idea where he was. And I know that if you're here this morning, you probably haven't been stranded in the middle of the ocean on a boat that was adrift. But I think a lot of us know what it's like to experience drift in our own lives. Have you ever woken up one morning or you found yourself in a situation you wondered, how did I get here? How did things come to this? Because, see, I don't think anybody kind of sets out to have a marriage that falls apart. I don't think that anybody sets out to file bankruptcy. I don't think anyone sets out to battle addiction. In fact, I read this week a wonderful quote. It says, addiction doesn't happen, it unfolds. See, addiction really is a culmination of a series of small choices. And what happens in life, sometimes we can become adrift because we stop being intentional about the decisions we're making. Instead of taking an active stance in our life, we let life happen to us. And that's really what this series is about. Some of us feel stuck. Some of us feel like we're drifting, and what we need is a reboot. And kind of the theme verse has been Romans chapter 12, verse 2. It says, do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. I love that the three key words there are conformed, transformed, and renewing. Don't be conformed to the habits and the patterns and behaviors of the world. Listen, the world is content for you to drift through life day after day, having no sense of purpose, meaning, or direction. Don't be conformed to the pattern of the world, but instead be transformed. See, I believe God has a better life for you. He wants a transformed life for you. So how do you get that? You've got to renew your mind. And this was originally written in Greek, and that Greek word for renew is the word reset. It's literally hitting the reset button, wiping the slate clean, and starting over with a whole new way of life. And so we kicked off this series talking about how do we wipe the slate clean? How do we stop conforming to the habits and behaviors? Because listen, if things are going to change, things have to change, right? If we don't change things in our life, nothing is ever going to change. So we got to wipe the slate clean. But once we wipe the slate clean, we have to have these new habits, these new behaviors, this new pattern against we're going to live. And so we started by talking about these new habits. The first one is that we want to focus on what's first. And really what that means is we've got to put God first in our life. And what it boils down to ultimately is that if God is not first in your life, God is not in your life. If God's not first in your life, he's not in your life. God doesn't want to be your side piece. He doesn't want to be your friend with benefits. God wants your whole heart. He wants every single part of you. And I'm going to cough into this microphone if I don't get some water. Pray for me. Struggling. So we got to put God first in our life. And even we talked about last week, I think sometimes what we struggle with is not the real struggle. The reason we experience the difficulties, the reason we experience drift is because God does not have first place. He doesn't have priority. And so I'm here to tell you, you can put all of these habits into action. You can read every book. You can go to every conference. You can attend every seminar. And nothing is going to change until you put God first in your life. And I'm preaching, and we haven't even got through the recap yet. You know, we got to focus on what's first. Then last week, we said we need to take the next step, which then we have to have the habit that we don't believe everything that we think. See, there are thoughts that we have. I don't know if you're like me. I have a lot of thoughts. Some of them are probably not good thoughts to have. But oftentimes we think that just because a thought pops into our mind that it's true, and so we dwell on it. And some of us have been dwelling on bitterness and resentment and hurt and pain for years, and it's killing us. And so instead, we're supposed to replace those thoughts with whatever is true, whatever is pure, whatever is honorable, whatever is commendable. We have to replace that garbage so that it doesn't affect our lives. We can't believe everything that we think. But today, as we kind of bring this series to a close, we want to talk about this third habit. And I believe this third habit is going to kind of tie everything together. And so if you're taking notes, if you're watching online, habit number 3, prioritize purpose over position. Here's what I mean. You got to prioritize your purpose over where you happen to be in the moment. Because for a lot of us, the way we make decisions is we drift. We just do what's comfortable. We just do what's easy. We just go with the flow. And so we allow our circumstances, we even allow criticism to impact our lives, and you're no longer making decisions based on the purpose that God put inside of you. It reminds me of the story of a father and son who decided they were going to go into town to sell their donkey. They wanted to make a little extra money, and so they wake up one morning, they grab the animal, and they start to lead him into town. Now, as they get close to the town, somebody sees them, and they notice that the father's kind of leading the donkey, and then the son is riding the donkey. And this person says, "Young man, that is so disrespectful. He is so much older than you. Why are you sitting there letting him carry? You should be leading the donkey. Your father should be sitting on the back resting." And so the father and son are kind of shocked and say, "Well, I never thought about it that way." And so they switched places, and now the son was leading the donkey, and the father was riding it. As they get right up to the town entrance, somebody else sees them and says, "Sir, that is extremely rude to your animal. Do you know how heavy you are? You're hurting that poor animal. You need to get off of his back, or else he's going to die." And again, the father and son are shocked, so they both decide, well, we'll both kind of lead the animal in. Well, they get right up to where the marketplace is, and somebody else looks over and says, "That animal looks exhausted. How have you made him walk this distance? He looks like he's about to keel over right here." Again, the father and son are so upset that they actually pick the donkey up and try to carry the donkey the rest of the way. But the donkey is so heavy that one of them trips, they drop the donkey, and it breaks its neck and it dies. It's a sad story, I know. Aww. But the whole point is that they set out with a purpose, but because they were so focused on other people's criticism, their purpose died before they arrived. I wonder how many of us have dreams that we've let die because we're so worried about what somebody else is going to say. I wonder how many of you have neglected your purpose because you're afraid of what criticism may come your way. Maybe it's a parent, maybe it's a spouse, but you're worried about somebody else and you've allowed criticism to paralyze you. Listen, my hope today is that we're able to operate and make decisions based on God's purpose for our life rather than the position we happen to find ourselves in. But I know that it's hard to make decisions because a lot of times we're faced with so many decisions throughout the day. In fact, I was doing some research this week, and studies show that depending on which one you looked at, the average adult American makes between 70 and 35,000 decisions a day. All right, now I don't even think I have 35,000 thoughts in a day. I think husbands can probably relate to this. You know, wives say, "What are you thinking?" What does the husband say? Nothing. No, we just turn the brain off. We're not thinking about anything. You know, I don't think it's probably 35,000. Probably more than 70, though. I probably have 70 decisions to make before I get out of the house for work every day. You know, am I going to hit the snooze button for the 5th time? You know, am I going to have Cinnamon Toast Crunch or Fruit Loops with marshmallows? You know, am I going to put on a new shirt, or do I think this one still smells okay enough I can wear it one more day? There's a lot of decisions that we make throughout the day. And have you noticed that the more options there are, the harder it is to choose? They've done studies that show the more options you have available to you, the harder it is to make a decision. And you know it's true if you've ever had a meal with a toddler, right? You go out to the restaurant and what do? You tell them, do you want the macaroni and cheese or the chicken tenders, right? You don't sit there and say, oh, they've got a lovely filet here. You know, there's a salmon with a bed of risotto. You don't give them the whole menu. You just say mac and cheese or chicken tenders, because otherwise you're going to be sitting there for 8 hours them trying to decide. And the same thing happens to us. A lot of times we get paralyzed because of the amount of decisions we have to make. And because we're paralyzed, we start to drift. Is this making sense? Okay, so I want to talk this morning. What are some things that paralyze us when it comes to decision making? I think the first thing is we get paralyzed when we think there's a godliest option. A lot of times we believe this myth that if you're presented with 3 options, that one of them is the right one and 2 of them are the absolute wrong one. And if you make the wrong decision, God's going to hate you, he's going to punish you, and you screwed up your life for the rest of time. Now listen, I am not saying that there aren't times in our life where God clearly has something he wants us to do and that the enemy might present us other options. Okay, that is 100% true. But I also believe that sometimes God is so powerful, he is so sovereign, that he will give you multiple options because no matter which one you pick, he can work with that. He's going to give you the option because he wants you to be happy. See, God is like a master chess player. Because if you ever play a chess master, it doesn't matter what move you make, they're going to position the pieces to make you go right where they want you to go. And when we make decisions, even if we make the wrong one, God is so good, he can work with that, and he'll just move you right in the place he wants you to be. I think sometimes God gives us multiple options because it's his way of blessing us. This is how I treat my kids. Our favorite dessert place in town is Big Easy Snowballs. And if you've ever been there, you know it's like heaven on earth. To call it a snow cone does not even do it justice. I think it's like a New Orleans shaved ice is how they phrase it. But if you walk up to their stand, they've got like hundreds of different flavors. And then you start thinking about combinations. There's so many options, like my brain can't even do all that math. But I'll take my boys there, and each of my kids has a little bit different personality. So one of them, he goes up and he's going to order the same thing every time. He knows what he likes, and he's not going to deviate from it. One of them, he'll alternate between 2 or 3 of his favorite flavors. But my youngest son has made it his mission to try every single flavor on the board. And so when we go up, he's just check that one off, check that one off. Even when we go to the gas station, he's made it his mission in life to taste every flavor of Fanta. Do you know how many flavors of Fanta there are? They just make them up now, like random stuff that's gross. And now we'll get up there and he'll say, Dad, which one would you pick? And I'll say, well, I wouldn't pick Fanta, but you do you, whatever you like. And so he'll ask me which one I pick, but my response is, whatever you pick is fine. And I wonder if maybe you're wrestling with a decision today, and what you need to realize is maybe God's saying, listen, there might be one I would pick, but whichever one you pick, I can work with that. You got a couple of different job opportunities in front of you. I can work with whichever one you pick. You're looking at a couple different houses. You have the freedom to choose. Listen, God isn't waiting for you to make a mistake. Even if you did make the wrong decision, he's going to work with that to bring you back to the right path. So we got to stop thinking there's one godliest option. The other thing that paralyzes us is we put too much pressure on ourselves. We put the pressure on ourselves to please everybody else. And here, this person is not paralyzed because you don't know what decision to make. You're paralyzed from moving forward in God's purpose because you've said yes to everybody else. You're so busy helping everybody else with their purpose that you can't live out your purpose. Listen, there's always going to be opportunities for you to serve. The PTA is always going to ask you to join, right? The team is always going to ask you to coach. Your boss is always going to ask you to be on a committee. There's always things you can do to fill up your time. Listen, don't miss this. If the enemy can't make you bad, he's going to make you busy. If he can't get you to mess up and make mistakes, he's going to keep you so busy you can't do the things he's called you to do. Am I preaching now? Listen, and so it's okay for sometimes for us to say no to things. We got to stop living for the approval of other people. You got to say no to some good things so you can say yes to the best things. So I want to take that pressure off of you today. Stop trying to please everybody. Stop putting that pressure on yourself. Now, the last thing I think paralyzes us is that some of us are sitting here this morning and you're waiting on a sign from God. Listen, you're waiting for the skies to open up and a beam of light to shine down and say, this is the next step that I have for you. And listen, there are certainly times where I believe that God has spoken to me. But I wonder how many times we're asking God for a sign and he's given us wisdom. You're asking God to show up and direct your next step. And he said, listen, I've spoken to you. I have wisdom. It's right here. Sometimes we just need to ask ourselves, God, what is it you want me to do? And we just need to trust that he's given us the wisdom to do it. And sometimes people come to me, I've been sleeping with my boyfriend or girlfriend. Should we move in together? Listen, you don't need a sign from God. You have wisdom to know what you're supposed to do. And that ain't it. People say, well, should I be more generous in my giving? I don't know. You don't need a sign from God. You have wisdom. Should I take my pastor out to eat Mexican for lunch? You don't need a sign from that. You got wisdom. Listen, sometimes we're looking for a sign, and God says, listen, you already have everything you need to do. You need to move forward. And I wonder how often we use a sign as an excuse not to be obedient. Delayed obedience is disobedience, by the way. If God has told you to do something and you're delaying, it's disobedience. And maybe some of us today need to stop asking God for a sign and start living out in his wisdom. Is this helpful to anybody this morning? All right, so the question that we need to ask ourselves then is, okay, what does it look like then to have wisdom when we make decisions? Like we're faced with so many options. If we want to live on purpose rather than out of our position, what does a godly system of making decisions look like? And to answer that question, I actually want to turn to the source of wisdom here. I want to look at some scripture. If you have your Bibles, go ahead and open up to Proverbs chapter 3. We're going to jump into verse 5 here. Which, by the way, how many of you have ever watched one of our services online? Anybody here? Great. Of course, all of you are watching online right now. Listen, that would not be possible without these amazing men and women who are on the tech team. They're running cameras. They're doing production. Can we just give it up for them this morning? Listen, I know some of you are in your pajamas with your coffee yelling at your kids, and you might not have your Bible in front of you, but we can read these verses because somebody's been intentional to make that happen. And so, guys, thank you so much. For those of you online, you're going to be able to read along with us because of them. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not rely on your own understanding. In all your ways know him, and he will make your paths straight. There's so much packed into these two little verses. I believe that in these two verses, we have a kind of a 4-step grid that will help us make decisions. It's not the only decision-making process, but I believe that this has helped some of us here today. So when we talk about this decision-making process, the first thing that I see in here is step 1 is we have to seek God's wisdom. We have to seek God's wisdom. That's what it says right there at the beginning of verse 5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Trust in God. Seek out his wisdom. What is it that he wants you to do? And by the way, this book is full of wisdom. I think sometimes we get the Bible confused. We think like it's an instruction manual, and we just read this and the solution to every problem is in there. That's not what the Bible is. It's not an instruction manual for you to get through life. But what it is it's a device God uses to change your character and to change who you are. Because instead of you having to reference this for every situation, if God changes your heart, then you've got his word in your heart wherever you go, in all situations. For example, about a month ago around Father's Day, I'd been reading in my devotional time, and I'd come across the verse, a gentle word turns away wrath. Kind of my, natural default, pattern of the world kind of thinking, as if somebody's coming at me, I'm going to come strong back, If you want to be disrespectful to me, I'm going to dish it out the same way you've dished it out to me. And I was thinking, okay, well, a gentle word and turn away wrath. Okay, so you got to be kind, like kind of turn away anger. And I don't know how it is for you, but do you ever get that like sinking feeling? You read scripture and you're like, I think God's going to like test me on this one later. And so that's kind of floating around in my mind. And sure enough, it was Father's Day, and woke up from my Father's Day nap, and I was excited because my wife was making her homemade fried shrimp and baked potatoes. There's nothing wrong with that. And so I hopped in the car, I had to go get some ingredients, and I pull into the parking space, and now it's the whole 10-minute ordeal, right? You sit there, you got to get your mask on, put the headphones in, find the list so you get everything. And as I'm kind of getting myself together, I notice out of the corner of my eye, there's a car that pulls into the spot next to me. Have you ever felt like somebody was looking at you? And so I kind of turn over, and the person next to me, this guy is looking right at me. And so I did what any normal person would do, and I looked the other way, right? I'm not a psychopath, okay? So I go back. I'm just pretending to do something on my phone at this point. And all of a sudden, I hear this knock on my passenger side window. And so I roll the window down and said, hey, what's going on? He said, man, back there you almost cut me off, and I almost wrecked my truck. And, man, he let me have it. And again, my personality, I can already feel my blood boiling. Like, you're not going to come knock on my car and say that to me, okay? Well, like we're about to have it out here. But then I just remember, a gentle word turns away wrath. And so he gets done yelling, and I looked at him, and I said, man, I'm so sorry. I apologize. I wasn't even paying attention. I'm sorry about that. And this guy stepped back like I had just slapped him in the face. And I wasn't sure what to expect next, but he goes, oh, man, I'm sorry. I'm just having a bad day. It's Father's Day. It's not turning out the way I expected it to. And so the two of us end up having this conversation. And we have this kind of this special moment between the two of us. Now, listen, I say that not to say I'm not the hero in that story, because that's not my reaction. God is the hero in that story because it's his wisdom that helped avert a potential crisis. It's his wisdom that helped avert a conflict. And I wonder, how many times throughout the day are we making the wrong decision simply because we didn't seek God's wisdom? This is why for the next 3 weeks, starting next Sunday, we have 21 days of prayer. We want to seek God first this year because I believe if we put him first, everything else is going to fall into place. I feel like I've preached that the last 3 weeks. Somebody here must need to hear that. We got to put God first. We got to seek his wisdom, and then we'll see change begin to take place. Now, once we seek God's wisdom, we can take that second step, which is to listen to godly people. Listen to godly people. That's what it says in the second half of verse 5. It says, do not rely on your own understanding. Listen, oftentimes it's our own understanding that got us in this mess to begin with, right? We can't listen to our own understanding. Proverbs 11:14 says it this way. Without guidance, a people will fall, but with many counselors, there is deliverance. And we're not talking about deliverance, dun 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 dun. That's not the deliverance we're talking about. We're talking about freedom. There's freedom. And some of us are stuck and drifting because you have blind spots that you're not aware of. And if you don't think you have blind spots in your life, that's your blind spot. And we need people in our lives who can confront us, who can challenge us, who can call us out. Because if you surround yourself with people who only say what you want to hear, then you're going to find yourself surrounded by people who have nothing to say. We need people in our lives who can challenge us. Now, many of you guys know Matt Wilson. He's our creative director here at Bridgepoint. He's in charge of our worship team. And I remember he first came on staff almost 5 years ago now. And when I say when he came on staff, I really mean I was trying to scrape change out of my couch to pay him to show up here a few times. Just an extremely talented guy. We had no money, but God led him here. And I remember he'd been here about a month, and we sit down. I have a one-on-one meeting with all of my staff members. And so we're sitting down, and for the first 15 minutes, they can talk about whatever they want to talk about, and then I get the second 15 minutes, and I remember during his 15 minutes, he said, hey, I want to talk to you about something. I was like, okay, great. He said, I've noticed that when we're leading worship, you stand on the back wall during that worship time. And so every time people are coming in and out, they're talking to you, and you're distracted, and you're not engaging in worship. And whether you mean to or not, it's sending a message that worship isn't important. And so I fired him. No, I didn't do that. I took it to heart, and I knew, you know what? He's right. Because I think a lot of times what we think is that the way that even our services are structured is that like music is the opening act for the teaching. Like, can I just be very clear? Worship is not the opening act for what we're doing now. Worshiping is the main event. That's why we're here. In fact, when we did our little survey about reopening, we asked people what they missed the most. You know, nobody said teaching. I mean, seriously, that hurt my feelings. But no, you know why? Because this part right here, you can get online. You can get the podcast. You know what you can't get? You can't get what it's like to worship with people around you. You can't get that community. It just doesn't always translate the same way. Listen, that's why we're here. Because like we said last week, the battle against sin always starts in the mind. And so we got to get our minds right. We got to focus on God. That's what worship does. Worship is the war that we're fighting. And when we worship, we see God begin to move. And so I had to get to a point where I was saying, you know what? I'm not going to sit in the back anymore. And so from that point on, I like to sit up front because leaders lead from the front. And so, hey, if you're a leader here today, I'm just going to challenge you. Lead from the front because it is too important for us to waste time being distracted by anything else. But I never would have come to that realization if I didn't have people around me who were willing to call me out on a blind spot. And the question is, do you have those people in your life? And if you don't, then maybe it's time to change some relationships. Maybe there's some people who don't need to be allowed to be an influence in your life. Maybe there's certain people, they just egg you on. They just try to get you to do all those same things. Maybe we need to have new relationships. By the way, that's why life groups are so important. They connect you with other people so you can have wisdom in your life. We have to listen to godly people. Now, the third step in this decision-making process, then, is do what you want. You say, well, Matt, that doesn't sound very spiritual, right? Didn't you just tell us we shouldn't do what we want? Listen, there's a certain order to these things, right? Like if you do the first two steps, if you seek God's wisdom, and then you actually listen to godly people, and by the way, when we say listen to godly people, like actually listen to them. You know, like sometimes people come to me, ask me, hey, you know, Pastor, what should I do? What does the Bible say about this? I say, don't do it. They say, okay, and then they go to the next person, don't do it. Next person, don't do it. They go, the 10th person says they can do it, and that's the person they listen to, right? Don't look for confirmation, like look for wisdom. But if you're seeking God's wisdom, if you listen to godly people, then you can do what you want. Now, the pattern of the world is to flip this upside down, is to do what we want and ask for confirmation later. But I think that it's okay to do what we want. Look at verse 6, the beginning of it. It says, in all your ways, know him. In all your ways. In the things that you do, you can acknowledge God. He can be present in the things that you do. I love Psalm 37, verse 4. It says, trust in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Now, growing up, I always read that as trust in the Lord, and he's going to give you everything that you've ever wanted. But that's not what it says, does it? It says, trust in the Lord, and he will give you what? He'll give you the desires. He'll give you new desires. Like if we're following God, he's going to give you a new heart. The things that you're passionate about are the things that he's passionate about. You know, I love what I do. I've told you guys before, when I was a kid, I'd line up my stuffed animals and preach to them. I'm living my dream job. I love it. But sometimes I'll meet with pastors who maybe have been in ministry for a while, and, you know, they do more complaining than celebrating. And, you know, my favorite is when they say, well, 40 years ago, I surrendered to the call to ministry. Like God, pulled them dragging and screaming into ministry. Listen, there might be some pastors like that. Like, I'm the one sprinting towards it, okay? So I'm not perfect, but just know I love what I do. And I think that God has things that you love that you do, and that's your purpose. What is it that breaks your heart? What is it that gets you going? When you're close to God, he gives you those new desires. And so it's okay to do the things that we want as long as God has been prioritized first. We have to stop feeling bad about ourselves. We have to stop thinking that we have to be miserable in order for God to be happy. It's possible for God to be pleased and you to be happy at the same time. And so we can do what we want. And then the last step, step number 4. Once we've gone through this whole process, we've sought God's wisdom, listened to godly people, do what we want, then we can ask for faith. We have to ask for faith. That's what that last part says. It says, and he will make your paths straight. And we got to be clear on this because sometimes we read it and we think, oh, he's going to make our paths easy. That's not what it says. It says your paths will be straight. You know what the next step is, but it's not always easy. You can make wise decisions, and bad things can still happen. In fact, Jesus says as much in Matthew chapter 12, verse 42. He's talking about the queen of the south. This is actually a reference to something Solomon dealt with. Jesus says, the queen of the south will rise up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it, because she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon. And look, something greater than Solomon is here. See, back in Solomon's day, he was known for his wisdom. He was known for his wealth and his power. And so the queen from the south came to hear all of Solomon's wisdom. And Jesus says, listen, she came to seek wisdom from Solomon, but one day she's going to stand in judgment over you because something greater than Solomon is here, and you need to pay attention to it. No, who is greater than Solomon? It's Jesus. That was a church answer, guys. That's the easy one. Jesus is saying, listen, I'm greater than Solomon. I have more wisdom than Solomon ever imagined. Listen, Jesus did everything right. Every decision he made was wise. He did exactly what his Father wanted. He lived a perfect life. And where did it get him? He was betrayed by a friend. Anybody ever been there? He was beaten. He had everything taken from him. He was humiliated. He was mocked. And ultimately, he was killed. They nailed him to the cross. And listen, if Jesus did everything right, and that's what happened to him, just know that you can do everything right. You can make all the wise decisions in the world, and guess what? Difficulties are still going to happen. But do not allow difficulties to lead to doubt. Do not allow your discouragement to cause you to doubt. Every day, ask God for faith. I think sometimes we think about faith as like, I believe this certain set of statements. That's not what faith is. At least not in context of a relationship. When I talk about faith with my wife, I'm not saying I believe a certain set of things about her. I say I'm faithful to her. Through the ups and the downs, through the good and the bad, through the victories and through the defeats. And when we have faith in Jesus, we're saying, I'm going to be faithful to you, whether things are going great or whether my world's falling apart. When I've made all the right decisions and things are awesome, and when I've done everything right and everything's not. I'm reminded of this picture of Mary Todd Lincoln, wife of Abraham Lincoln. And for years, this has been stored in the Lincoln Library and Museum in Illinois. And in fact, people from all over the world would come to see this because how they came across this painting is that in order to celebrate the victory in the Civil War, Mary Todd decided to have this portrait commissioned of herself, and she wanted to give it to her husband as this gift. But Lincoln went to the theater before she was able to give it to him. So, of course, he was assassinated, and she never got to give her husband this portrait. And so by the time the painter was finished and he brought it over, she was so distraught. She said, I don't want that around. Get that out of here. Just throw it away. This guy had invested so much time and energy into it. He said, I have to get something back. So he sold it to a local family. They kind of passed it down throughout the generations. Even Lincoln's kids knew about this picture. I mean, it's a very well-known picture. Again, eventually the museum procured it. It was on display until about 8 years ago. The picture was kind of old, and so they took it down to restore it. And one of the guys who was restoring it noticed there was some odd signature on it. And so they started running this portrait through these different tests, and what they realized is it was fake. It wasn't real. In fact, it was a painter who nobody knew. The woman wasn't Mary Todd Lincoln. It was some anonymous woman. And so now that painting has no value. It's not in the museum. And the only reason they knew it was fake is because it had to be put through tests. Listen, in our life, it's easy to say we have faith. A lot of us believe we have faith. Some of us feel that we have faith. But the only way to know if that faith is real is it's got to be tested. And sometimes in our life, the reason that God allows us to encounter those storms, The reason that God allows us to travel difficult roads, the reason that we experience things that we never anticipated is because those are opportunities to test our faith. Those are opportunities for us to draw closer to God. And I don't know who needs to hear it today, but don't get discouraged. Don't give up because life didn't turn out the way you anticipated. If we put God first, I believe the best is yet to come. If we trust in Him, things may not be great now, but we know that Jesus will make all things right one day down the road. And that starts with making sure that we're living out of our purpose instead of our position. I don't know where you're at today. I think maybe some of us are here and we need to start seeking God's wisdom. I want to challenge you. Be a part of 21 days of prayer. This starts next Sunday. You're having an opportunity for 21 days in a row. You can be here. You can watch online. I want to make it so easy for you because I believe God has something He wants to do in your life if you'll just put Him first. Maybe for some of us, we need to start surrounding ourselves with godly people, and we need to start listening to them. The things they say may not be easy to hear, and the changes might not be easy to make, but I promise it'll be worth it. Some of you are here, and you know the decision you need to make. You just need to do it. Stop feeling bad for having a desire to do something great for God. That's your sign, by the way. Go ahead and do it. And then for some of us, don't give up hope. Don't get discouraged. Don't let doubt creep in. Better days are ahead. But again, you can do all of those things, but if you don't have a relationship with Jesus, it ain't going to work. That has to be the foundation upon which your life is built. Listen, we talked about drifting. We've all drifted away from God. We've made decisions where we've rejected Him. We've said our way is better than yours. But maybe today is the day to come home. Maybe today you're ready to begin a real relationship with Him. Or maybe you did a long time ago. And today you're ready to say, listen, I want to get back on course. If that's you, I want to lead you in a prayer. So all across this room, if you'll bow your heads and close your eyes with me. If you're watching online and you're ready to make that decision, you can join us as well. Wherever you're at, you can say this simple prayer. God, I admit that I'm broken and that I've sinned against you. I believe that your death and resurrection was enough to save me. And so today I'm committing my life to follow you. God, I thank you. I thank you that no matter how long we've been drifting, you're ready to bring us home. So I pray today for every person who just made that decision. I thank you for that. I pray that you would begin to work transformation in their hearts. I pray for those of us who've been paralyzed that you'd help us move forward. Those of us who've been living comfortably, you would make us uncomfortable. And today, God, help us to live out of purpose instead of position. It's in your name I pray. Amen.